is this a moment that will pass, or is it a movement that will last?
Injustice anywhere represents injustice for everyone. And it's absolutely true. I'm thinking about yesterday, and I'm thinking about the decision that came down in the criminal case for Breonna Taylor.
Right.
Breonna Taylor and her family did not receive justice yesterday. They did not receive justice. And that means all of us did not receive justice. There was a settlement in the civil case, but we all know that her family would much rather have their daughter with them as opposed to have a financial settlement. Granted, there's no way to bring Breonna Taylor back. However, there was an opportunity to hold the people accountable who was responsible for her murder. So I am passionate for diversity and inclusion for a variety of different reasons. One of the things that I really do have to share is that when you take a look at the discipline of diversity and inclusion just overall, we have failed when it comes to addressing systemic racism. And the reason why is because we've never discussed it before. We never spoke of it. At most, it was a footnote when we have a conversation around unconscious bias. Now we're actually bringing that conversation to the workplace. And we're talking about what is systemic racism? What is the impact when you take a look at 250 years of slavery, 100 years of Jim Crow, another 60 years of separate but equal, and 50 years of red line districting? What happens to an ecosystem that you create for Blacks and for African Americans? And it's easy to look at other industries and point the finger and say, yes, obviously there's gaps in the justice system. Look what's going on in the world. Yep, there's gaps in the education system as well, and in the healthcare system, because we're being disproportionately impacted. But we have to start with the man in the mirror.
You know, as a disciple of King, that I've recognized that you need power. You need political power, you need civic power, you need economic power. And that so we have been empowering our communities to register to vote and to vote, to make demands predicated on justice and fairness. But I also need to recognize that really as an activist, I need to take wider society along with me too. Otherwise, people believe this is a zero-sum game. If I gain, you lose. And so I have to constantly remind people that by me and people who look like me fulfilling their potential doesn't mean you lose. It means we all gain.
Exactly.
That our institutions become more creative, more dynamic. Our societies become more together, more united. We better understand each other. We live together. We love together. It's not just a beautiful message. It's a practical one.
So I think that both of you have touched on, so on a personal level, I think that there's a lot of courage that we all need as individuals to be that lone voice in the room, to be resilient. And, you know, if I'm honest, some battles I've won, some I've obviously lost. I think that, you know, this is a time where I've really tried to really harness my power, harness my position in the organization that I'm in to actually come to the fact where you can be saying, Lord Simon, that Steve Morales has produced and the co-op have produced commitments towards racial equality and inclusion. And I think that I'm really kind of proud of where we've got to, but we still have a way to go. And I think that one of the things that I'm really trying to do on a personal level is understand why this hasn't worked before. So why has it not actually worked before? What are the things, you know? So I think that there's a moment for D&I and belonging that needs to evolve into a new space. There's a piece around I'm studying at the minute, the Truth and Reconciliation Committee. I'm not saying that that's the thing, but there are some principles within there which talk to educating, recognizing your truth, and actually making sure that you listen and then you can move forward into some tangible action. So I'm still a way to go, but we're all trying here at the co-op and on a personal level to kind of play my part. And I remember, you know, the little girl that I was many, many moons ago. And I think that the sad thing is that some of the challenges that I experienced when I was growing up and when I started my career still exist today. And it can't be acceptable for us to still be here at this time and still be experiencing some of the challenges that we are challenging as a Black community. So that's kind of where I am trying my best to move to.
In addition to that, we're inviting in our ERGs to participate in some of our VP meetings as well. So Bowl has had an opportunity to actually sit in on some of our VP meetings with our Chief Executive Officer. That has helped tremendously. In addition to that, what are we doing from a talent acquisition perspective? How do we make sure that we get more Black and African Americans in senior leadership roles? So it's what organizations do we partner with that can help us really build out that pipeline? In addition to that, what are we doing with the great talent that we have that's already within our organization that happens to be diverse? How do we create internal mobility? So I have to say that I am very proud that, you know, as I take a look at our demographics and our numbers, pulling the numbers from June and July to August, we have made, you know, some improvement and some increase in terms of internal hiring and external hiring. But again, we're still just at the very early stages of it, and there's still a lot to go. And I love the recurring theme that keeps coming up, the idea of abundance. Just because we're being inclusive and we're creating additional opportunities for people of color, that doesn't necessarily mean that we're taking away opportunities from any other group. And I think there's a fear that comes up, and we got to constantly address that. Fear and faith cannot live in the same house. So we have to address the fact that we're going to focus on abundance, and we're going to create more opportunity for our hypos and for our people of color and for our indigenous communities and for all spectrums of diversity within our organization. But we're also going to be unapologetic about the work that we're doing specifically for Blacks and African Americans right now at this time, because this is where the spotlight is.
You know, in the past, I was an angry young man, and sometimes I'm still angry and impatient and frustrated. But I know, as I said before, that we need to take people along a journey. And there's a few phrases that come to mind. Claire mentioned one: truth and reconciliation. And I think with the Black Lives Matter historic moment, there's a generation of young Black kids and white who've gone on the street demanding that we confront our history. In the UK, they've torn down statues and want to lay bare the often horrific history of our institutions. And the thing about that is that this also benefits everybody in this truth and reconciliation process, because what you fundamentally get is knowledge of the past and how it's influenced the present, but acknowledging that. So knowledge and acknowledgement of what's occurred and what is built on 200 years of slavery, 200 years of colonialism, 200 years of extreme racism, the institutions that benefited from it, many of them in our banks, our shipping magnates, our insurance companies, were predicated on that gross inequality. Confront that, lay it bare, and rebuild better. One of the things that I did with the former Prime Minister, Theresa May, in this conversation was to say, look, our institutions need to have what we described a racial disparity audit to look at who runs things, who is in management, who are the cleaners, who are the security guards, lay it bare. She said boldly that we need to be brave. We need to lay bare those uncomfortable truths. And when we do that, then we came up with a mantra: explain these disparities, which actually are inequalities. Explain or change. And then we began that process on how we change. I'm no longer the chair. I'm the former chair of the Racial Disparity Unit, but I'm shouting to the present government. So I think for many companies and institutions, the two things: truth and reconciliation, and racial disparity audits, ethnic minority pay reviews, see who's being paid what, and then have a plan to close those gaps. black and white. I mean, often it shouldn't be this way, but the reality, as my fellow panelists will tell you, that sometimes a white CEO like Steve Murrow's, I hope I got his name correct, when he says, as a white man, I need to understand the racial, deep-seated racial inequalities. Sometimes, Shoku, it's more powerful him saying that than me. It's definitely showing empathy. It's definitely wanting to see a world through my lens. And so we need allies. You know, as men, we've got to stand up for women. We've got to stand up for other oppressed peoples. It's not just we're saying this is a black issue. We're saying this is an issue of greater equality, and we need to recognize that.
Most of the top champions around the world are people of color. When they don't have organizations or policies or strategies holding them back, it's based entirely on their own personal talent and potential. They reach the top. There's nothing stopping them. And if only we could replicate that in our own organizations.
We have this sort of prom song which they sing every year. It's called Rule Britannia. Rule Britannia, Britannia ruled the waves. Britain never, never will be slaves. And there was this argument that actually in the 21st century, we should not be holding that song in great reverence. And the BBC said, yeah, they're probably right. And then the backlash, and then the BBC, no, we probably got it wrong. I say this, imagine for a second, primary school kids, 10 and 11, from mixed backgrounds, singing Rule Britannia. Could you imagine that? I don't think so. If it's not right for 10-year-olds, it shouldn't be revered by adults. So we have to be bold. We have to be brave. I don't want to knock you, the BBC, but our institutions need to be held to account.
If I may add my own final tip or takeaway for audiences, I believe that most people want to do the right thing, but sometimes there is an empathy gap. And we've heard a lot about empathy today. And there is a famous quote in To Kill a Mockingbird when Atticus says to Scout, if you can learn a simple trick, Scout, you'll get along a lot better with all kinds of folks. You never really understand a person until you consider things from his point of view, until you climb inside his skin and walk around in it. Note, he said his skin, not his shoes. And if you are a person of color, you can't change the color of your skin. So I think that there's one thing you can do is to speak to your Black and Asian and minority colleagues. Really listen without getting defensive and try to understand what it is like to live in their skin. And if you don't like what you hear, do something to make a change and start with yourself. As Ramcess said, start with the man in the mirror. I also really believe in the value of exclusion workshops that allow those in positions of privilege and power to experience, even if it's for a brief moment, what it feels like to be excluded or to be treated unfairly. Now it's over to you. We would love for you to pledge to write to Layla in 3 months' time to chart your journey and the actions that you've taken so that hopefully when we meet again in a year's time, our collective actions will have helped to shift the global dial.